Hey guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. Today we have an all-time great video for you guys. A video that I've actually been pondering on, sleeping on, thinking about how I'm going to do this for a year. Since I've started my channel, this has been something that was kind of on the front of my mind. I've wanted to do it because these are the type of fragrances that really move me. This is the type of perfume that gets me going. This is the type of thing that I have a true passion for. And sadly, it's a very complex subject for a couple reasons. So first of all, obviously you saw the thumbnail and you saw the title, and we are going to be talking about a comparison video today on what is come to in the community be known as a unicorn scent, a true unicorn in the true sense of a word. You know, a bottle pops up and it instantly, the vintage bottles go for, it can kiss $1,000 without batting an eye, right? And the fragrance we're going to be talking about today is Guerlain's Derby. Now, I have a 1990s bottle, so a couple housekeeping notes will get out of the way. Number one, I have a 1990s bottle, and from 1985 when it was issued, it was originally issued in what they call the Eagle bottle. Now, the Eagle bottle, I don't really know how it got the name the Eagle bottle, because it was a bottle that was designed by Robert Guerlain, and it was supposed to represent a Roman centurion's breastplate. And so when you look at the Eagle bottle, you will see this armor, like, you know, going etches into the bottle. And that makes a lot of sense to me. That was actually the working name of the perfume when Jean-Paul Guerlain was working on it in the 1980s. It was known as Centurion, and it ended up coming out as Derby. And to then muddy the waters even more, because again, this is a complicated subject. It's not just as easy to say, you know, it's not as clear cut as, you know, black over here and white over there. Is Jean-Paul Guerlain, over the last, you know, decade or so, more and more information has been coming out that he had help. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with having help. I mean, to me, whether he did it all by himself or whether there was some help that he had, does not change the fact that in my mind, he is one of the greatest perfumers ever, that I've ever gotten a chance to get to know his work. His work touches me in a way that very few perfumers do. Everything that he's done, Heritage is one of my favorite. Heritage is actually probably, you know, if you said, Ramsey, you can put your name on one masculine fragrance, go. I would just pick Heritage without even thinking. It's already there. You know, Heritage is the brilliant work for me. And Derby is right there as well. It's top three masculines for me. It's Heritage, it's Derby, and it's Habit Rouge, and then it's, of course, L'Instant de Guerlain right below that trio in some form, right? And so this is a unicorn scent, but he didn't do it alone. Apparently he had help from a woman who was somehow involved in the airline business. I don't really know her background well enough. I'm very sorry. I just know that her name came up in, you know, conversations recently. And then to solidify the fact even more that he had some help, her name pops up on Parfumo. So if you go search Derby on Parfumo, you'll notice that it says Perfumers, Jean-Paul Guerlain, and Anne-Marie Saget is her name. And if you click on her name, you realize all she has credited to her name is Derby. So it's like, what in the world is going on, right? And if you click on some of the other Guerlains, like for example, if you go to, let me see if I can grab this without causing a mess. So if you click on something like, just as an example, if you go on Parfumo and you click on Samsara, right? One of the greatest sandalwood fragrances of all time. This almost reminds me of like this temple, you know, this Indian temple, if you will. Just a beautiful bottle. And this fragrance, if you click on it on Parfumo, shows that, again, there are two perfumers, Jean-Paul Guerlain and Gerard Anthony. And so this is all kind of recent news. Anyways, I bring it up to just say that the original Derby was made by Jean-Paul Guerlain, yes, but there was someone else that was working with him at the time. And that someone else is only credited to this fragrance, Derby and Derby alone. And the reason that that is important is because Derby is somewhat singular in the Guerlain portfolio. Guerlain is known for their Guerlainade, right? So they're known for stuff like Shalimar, where you get this, you know, vanillic ambery, benzoin-y, tonka beanie thing. And the Guerlain is a well-kept secret what it is, but you smell it over and over and over again in their perfumes. You smell it in Abbey Rouge. You smell it in Lids. You smell it in Heritage. You know, you smell it in all of these fragrances. Val de Nuit, you smell it over and over and over again. And here, guess what? You don't smell it. You don't get that vanillic, you know, tonka bean sweetness in the base. What Derby is, in a nutshell, if you wanted to explain it in layman's terms, well, not in layman's terms, but in terms that most perfume heads can really understand, you would say that this is a proper leather chypre. And it's done with almost no sweetness. It's done with this energetic, masculine, I would say this is probably one of the highest class fragrances that I have in my collection. And I would say that if I was going to meet somebody, you know, who's important, that I actually respect, I was going to say the president, but I wouldn't waste this on meeting that. I wouldn't waste this on meeting him. But let's say you were going to meet like the CEO of your company, right? And you wanted to wear your best fragrance, your fragrance that puts your best foot forward and puts you in a position of power, right? This is what I would wear. This is my power fragrance. This is my CEO. No, this is a no nonsense type of fragrance. It is woody, it's spicy, it's leathery, it's earthy, it's green, it is dry, it's extremely dry, and it's animalic. And I've been wanting to do this comparison video for a long time, mostly because first of all, when you search Derby, there's just not that many videos on the internet about it, because most people nowadays have sort of moved on from this. Or if they haven't moved on, they see it on eBay for $500 to $1,000 and they say, I'm not going to spend that much money on it. And again, Guerlain is reissuing this, apparently. Rumor is that they are reissuing it, and it will be over $500 for a bottle. I have no clue what the bottle will look like. I have no clue how much juice you're going to get. I have no clue what the version of the juice you're going to get is. All I know is there's a 1985 version, which this came out in the 90s, the bottle that I'm holding, but I'm still going to refer to it in this video as the 1985 version because I don't think there was a reformulation from the 80s to the 90s. And there is a 2005 version. And I have a decant of the 2005 version. And you can see I've given them both a decent amount of wear. Okay, I love this fragrance. It's one of my cherished fragrances. I wear this on, you know, special occasions. Or in this case, just because I wanted to do a special video for you guys. And you can see I've put a hell of a dent in the 2005 decant that I've had. So on the left hand is the vintage. And on the right hand is the modern. And I'm going to try my best to simplify what I consider to be a very complex issue, okay? The differences between these fragrances are minute. Jean-Paul Guerlain and Thierry Vasseur did a fantastic reformulation. Maybe one of the best I've ever smelled, literally. It is, it's brilliant. It's nothing less than brilliant. But are they exactly the same? No. So the first thing I want you to remember is if you own a bottle of Derby, whether you own the Eagle bottle, the one that was originally supposed to be Centurion, whether you own the bottle that I have from the 90s, or whether you own the 2005 bottle that was issued in the, what they call the Les Parisiens line. You know, I just have a decant of it. I don't have a full bottle, but if you own the Les Parisiens line of Derby, you have an amazing fragrance. Don't let someone tell you one version is better than the other. I do not believe that for 1 second. And me, I am a huge reformulation hawk. You know, I am on it. If there's a change, I'm on it. You know, I can usually pick it up. And there are changes here, but what a reformulation they did. So I will just say again, there is no bad Derby. Okay, no way about it. In fact, I would argue that if you wore this one day, okay, or you wore the Eagle bottle one day, you wore this the next day, and you wear this the day after, you wouldn't be able to pick out the differences. Not from one day to the next. Now, if you do what I do, and you put, you know, the vintage on your left hand, and you put the modern on your right hand, and you go back and forth, The differences will be apparent to you, but they're slight. Okay, they're extremely slight. So keep that in mind. We're talking about minute differences. There are some, but the basic structure of the fragrance is intact, and it's intact beautifully. What a reformulation they did. And the fact that they discontinued it makes me feel like maybe some of the more, maybe it was a sales thing, maybe it didn't sell well, or maybe some of the more restrictive IFRA policies were forced, or European Cosmetic Association forced them to discontinue it because they couldn't get the reformulation correct. I don't know what the story is there. All I know is that they did a hell of a reformulation, and they deserve a hand for that. They deserve their flowers for that. So let's talk about Derby and some of the differences to my nose, okay? So the first thing is that it opens up very spicy. Spice is the key to Derby to my nose. The spices are slightly different between the two versions. So it opens up with this collection of herbs and spices, and the vintage has one big difference from the get-go, and that is peppermint. The vintage version has this peppermint note that is there, but it's almost not there, if that makes sense. You can smell it. When you first spray, I'm talking 10, 20, 30 seconds, the peppermint really plays its role, and then it really sits in the background, because almost instantly when you spray the vintage version, you are hit with, probably within 10 to 20 seconds, you begin to get the formings of this isobutylquinoline leather that takes over. Now, one thing I should say right here, from before we go any further, is that Derby follows in the footsteps of a couple fragrances from the past. And that may shock some people, because remember, this is a unicorn scent. This is a mountaintop experience. And it is, but it's not wholly original to my nose. And what I mean by that is, if you go back in time, even 5 years, you have to go back, let's say 5 to 8 years in the past, you'll find fragrances that do basically what Derby did, but in their own style. So for example, if you go look at something like this. This is from 1980, and this is called Weil pour Homme. And this is 100 ml of Weil pour Homme. And Weil pour Homme shares a lot of similarities with Derby to my nose. There are some differences, but there are a lot of similarities as well. No one talks about this being a Grail scent. No one. No one's out there pounding the table going, Weil pour Homme is one of the greatest leathers of all time. No one. Zero people that I know. Now, I will tell you, this is an absolutely stunning. Oh, and it's a leathery, woody chypre fragrance, just like Derby. There's lavender here, which I don't get very much lavender in the vintage version of Derby. Maybe there's a little bit of lavender in the modern, but I don't get hardly any lavender in the vintage. And it's much more aldehydic, and they've used some other notes that are missing, like, for example, they've used geranium and clary sage and some things that are not in Derby. But other than that, the note listing is very, very similar. You have some citruses, you have some rosemary here, which is not in Derby, but you have these green notes, you have mugwort. Vintage Derby has mugwort or artemisia, which mugwort or artemisia pops up in a couple other fragrances, and you have this spice. And the spice that you get in Weil pour Homme will remind you of fragrances that began to pop up after Weil pour Homme became very popular. So for example, if you pull up a fragrance like this, and this is one that most vintage hunters will know very well. This is, let's show you guys the right side, shall we? This is Santos de Cartier from 1981. One of my favorite fragrances actually, it's my favorite Cartier fragrance, period. And this also has lavender, but there's a mixture of pepper, nutmeg, vetiver, sandalwood, patchouli, and woods that will very much, and a slight touch of castoreum. See, when I think of the 80s, I think of, an all-out arms race in the men's fragrance aisle. It was an out-and-out arms race between YSL Coros and, something like Antaeus which is my favorite fragrance of all time right now. I'm saying it's my favorite fragrance of all time. Tomorrow, if you ask me, I very well might say, sorry, it's Bel Ami again, but these go back and forth, okay? Antaeus, Bel Ami are fighting for the top crown for me, and both fragrances have this 80s power about them. I hate using that word because, you know, I've seen some other YouTube reviewers that just scream it, power, but no, they really do. They have this power, they have this personality about them, you know. Antaeus is never to be bullied. Antaeus is never to be taken lightly. You don't spray Antaeus if you want to go stand in the corner, right? You spray Antaeus when you want every single eyeball in the room to look at you when you walk in. That castoreum, that animalic, sexual, metallic castoreum is, you can't hide. There's nowhere to hide. You know, I feel like women will hunt you down like a hound dog if you're wearing Antaeus. And there's this overtly sexual nature to Antaeus. Bel Ami, you can't hide wearing Bel Ami. I wore Bel Ami on a road trip the other month ago. And I went down to Houston, Texas, and I stopped in some podunk town in the middle of nowhere. And I remember, you know, this lady behind the counter, I was getting gas. It didn't work outside. I had to go inside. And she goes, boy, and we're in Texas, boy, you smell good. What is that? I said, it's Hermes Bel Ami, ma'am. She goes, Bella, what? I never heard of Hermes. And then the other lady, who's a little bit younger, came by and goes, you've never heard of Hermes? Oh, yeah, they make those leather things. And I was just like, oh, God, get me out of here. But they will smell you. You can't hide wearing Bel Ami or Antaeus or anything like that. And, you know, Bel Ami is much more focused on the leather. It's a leathery, spicy fragrance, whereas Derby is a spicy, leathery fragrance, if that makes sense. And there's some differences in my mind in regards to how the fragrances wear on skin. If you wear Coros or Antaeus, you're saying one statement. But if you wear something like Patou pour Homme, right? This is another one, Patou pour Homme, that is not in the same realm as Antaeus or, you know, Coros, or I'm just using those because those are the biggest examples, or Furio, or those 80 fragrances that are just extremely bombastic. These are the refined, for me, these are the refined 80s fragrances. These were for the men that didn't want to smell of piss or, you know, beaver glands, or I think of fragrances like Santos, and I think of fragrances like Patou pour Homme. And I would venture to throw Derby into that list. Okay, I wouldn't put it with Coros or Antaeus. I would put it with Cartier, Santos, and Patou pour Homme, personally, because there is this elegance about them. This is also a CEO fragrance. You know, the Mysore sandalwood in here, the vetiver, the cedar, the clary sage, the Malabar pepper, the pimento, okay? The pimento. And the reason I point that out is there is a pepper-pimento combination in Vintage Derby that will remind you, if you're familiar with Patou pour Homme, it will remind you of the pepper-pimento combination of Patou pour Homme. It will. You can't get away from it. The spice combination will remind you of Cartier Santos. There's no doubt about it. And so that's why, to me, as good as Derby is, and it is fantastic, you know, like I said, CEO fragrance. This is a CEO fragrance. Everyone will take you seriously wearing this. You are not a joke. You are not to be trifled with wearing Derby, right? But it's a different feeling than something like Antaeus or Bel Ami, or, you know, that that opening of the vintage with the mugwort, because there is green mugwort in here, will remind you a little bit of the green mugwort used in something like Davidoff, which came out a year before Derby. Davidoff. And this is a leather green. Look at the color of the juice, is green, you know, mugwort with some cigar touches. Or if you know the greenness of Devin from the 1970s, 77. This is a leather chypre that that uses a lot of mugwort in the top and galbanum. Now, there's no galbanum in Derby, but you could think of the green touches in something like Jules. This is another leather from the 80s that they were competing with. Jules, I'd put much more close to Antaeus or Bel Ami or Furio or Coros than I would the more refined fragrances of Santos de Cartier, Patou pour Homme, and Derby. So that's the backdrop. That's kind of what they're going against. But again, that spice combination with leather, you get 5, 6, 7, 8 years before Derby. Derby was not a revolutionary fragrance. It wasn't. And I don't even know if it sold very well for Guerlain. Actually, I don't know if it did. I don't think people were beating down the door to buy it because it seemed like kind of a little bit of a retread. It's only looking back that I think some of us vintage hunters realize the beauty and the glory of Derby and just how polished and smooth it is, and the way that, you know, that Guerlain history wraps everything up, and, you know, the materials are of the highest quality. There is no doubt about that. So I've completely gone off track now. I was just talking from the heart there, but let's get back to kind of the pros and cons of the vintage versus the modern. So the vintage has this slight peppermint in the opening, which the modern does not. That's number one. Number two, there are many small differences between the two. Small, minute differences that you can kind of point out. But let's get to the big differences, because the big differences are why you guys are here. It's probably what you'll remember anyways, is more of the big differences. So number one big difference for me when you look at the vintage versus the modern is the number one big difference is that the vintage Derby on my left hand has this much heavier animalic, heavier handed use of leather. Now, when you compare it to some of these other leathers, like if you're comparing this Derby to Dior Jules, you'll say, shit, this almost has no leather. I get hardly any leather compared to this. But when you compare it to something like the modern Derby, you're going to notice that the leather in the vintage feels heavier, smokier, more animalic, and more present in the fragrance. So when you first spray, like I said, 20 to 30 seconds in, that IBQ leather starts to push forward instantly. It's extremely well blended. Again, there's a lot more going on. You get the bergamot and the lemon and the mugwort and the peppermint, and you get the pimento, which will remind you of Patou pour Homme, and you get the nutmeg, which will remind you the way that that combination of spices is done will remind you of Santos de Cartier. There's jasmine in the vintage. There's no jasmine in the modern. There's rose in the vintage. There's no rose in the modern. There is vetiver in the vintage. There's no vetiver listed in the modern. And again, I'm going off of Parfumo, but I get a vetiver accord in the modern, which adds this brightness to it. It adds this, actually, you know what the vetiver in the modern smells like? I'll tell you. It reminds me of the vetiver used here in Guerlain's vetiver. There's this lemony, citrusy crispness to it. Almost tobacco. Almost like you're smelling not just the vetiver in Guerlain's vetiver, but also hints of this earthy, soily tobacco in the modern, which is not there in the vintage. The vintage is much more about the combination of woods and spices and leather. And so that ever-present leather in the vintage is the number one difference between the modern, okay? And that's probably the number one difference between the two, actually, is that it has more, as Eugene would say. If you've heard Eugene talk about Derby, he mentions hoof, okay? He mentions hoof. You get this horse hoof. And, you know, Jean-Paul Guerlain was a lover of horses. He loved the equestrian arts and sports and anything to do with horses. He was there. And you know, you get some of that in this. You get this earthy, this leathery, horsey, you know, slightly animalic. You know how horses kind of stink no matter how much you clean them. They have that animal, this wild animal aspect to them. You know, you could spend hours scrubbing them and then they just walk outside and they instantly smell bad again. That's kind of the idea with Derby, is there's this part of nature, this leathery animalicness, this primal animalic bit that comes through in the leather much more, and it's smokier. The leather is much more smoky and deeper, and if they just crank the dial up, because the dial is cranked down is the thing. The dial is cranked down on Derby. If they crank the dial up, it would start to smell like the smoky leather in something like Jules. It would start to smell much more like the smoky leather you're going to get in something like Bel Ami, or, you know, some of the other leathers that I've raved about, Leonard Poiron, but they didn't. They cranked it down. It's a softer, quieter, almost in the style, okay? And you guys may disagree with me, but I think I've come to the conclusion that Derby is much more like a Spanish leather, because I did an entire video on leathers throughout the ages. It was called Spanish leather versus Russian leather versus modern leather, or something like that. And, you know, for the Spanish leathers, I think I used Derby as an example, because Derby, you know, Spanish leather translates to Peau d'Espagne. And I've talked about how much I love Peau d'Espagne from Santa Maria Novella, thanks to Armando for sending me that beautiful decant. But it literally translates to skin of Spain. And it's supposed to smell like a Spanish woman's skin, okay? And you can imagine a Spanish woman's skin isn't going to smell like out and out leather like Bel Ami. You know, it's not going to smell like that. It's going to be much more subtle, much more refined. And that is what you get in Derby. The leather is there, but it's very refined. But when you do the comparison, you notice that the leather in the vintage is much more smoky and animalic compared to the modern, okay? You get a little bit more hoof, as Eugene would say. And the vintage dries down to much more of this proper classic leather chypre. You get more textured oak moss, okay? In the vintage style, you get more of this labdanum proper chypre feel in the vintage. And I mentioned that the modern, I'm going to take a sip, excuse me. I mentioned that the modern brings in some of that fresher citrusy vetiver that you get in Guerlain's Vetiver. To my nose, it feels that way anyways. And the vintage stays darker for longer. So ultimately, it does feel like it kind of, you know, it feels like the darkness of the leather and the smokiness of the leather just refuses to just break, you know, like in the modern. Side by side, that's what you get. Now, if you smell this alone, you might go, smoky leather, what is he talking about? I get nothing but kind of spices and pepper and, you know, little touches of green. But when you do this side-by-side comparison, you will get that. And so let's go to the modern. Let's talk about the modern some, okay? And I don't know if I showed you, but I've made a hell of a dent in the modern, in the decant that I have. I've worn the piss out of this. I love this fragrance. And I love I mean, if I reach for Derby, honestly, for me, it doesn't matter. I could wear either or and be just completely happy as a pig rolling around in mud. And so the 80s, the modern one, though, compared to the 80s, the modern one, though, feels much more like that mugwort, artemisia, heavy green, you know, touch that you kind of get in something like Devin or something like Jules. There's a lot of green touches in this. Dark green, deep dark green touches. Is missing. It's been removed. It's been replaced. And, you know, it harkens back, you know, when you think about the vintage Derby harkening back to some of these vintage fragrances, this, you will still kind of get a little bit of a flashbulb of the vintages, but there's a little bit more of this shaving foam freshness in the modern, which sounds very strange. Because you notice I didn't mention that in the vintage at all. Like there's no barbershop elements in the vintage. And while that might not necessarily be true, there may be some barbershop elements in the vintage. What I will say is that maybe they're not completely missing, but they are extremely toned down and subtle, okay? In the modern, you will notice it. You'll notice that there's an orange note that is not listed in the vintage. So you get this orange, and you get this barbershop shaving foam aspect that is missing in the vintage. Okay, so it's much fresher, and that's why I say it. Jean-Paul Guerlain and Thierry Vasser, I think, modernized it for modern noses, is what they tried to do. And the spices are very similar in both, but I feel like in the modern, maybe you get a little bit more clove, maybe just a little bit more clove, whereas in the vintage, so the modern, you get a little bit more clove. The vintage, you get a little bit more of that pimento, which again is going to remind you much more of Patou pour Homme, right? And so a little bit more of this pimento in the vintage. And the biggest difference, so again, let's just go to the biggest difference. I'm going to skip some of these tiny little details. The biggest difference for me, I mentioned in the vintage, the biggest difference was that smokier leather comes forward earlier, stays longer, and when you smell them side by side, you can really notice the two. The biggest difference, though, when you smell the modern side by side, is that Thierry Vasser added this huge carnation note. Carnation is the star of the modern show. It adds some of the spiciness that is missing from the pimento and you know, some of the other notes that just don't feel as prominent. And this lemony carnation mixture adds to the missing of the mugwort. So it adds some, carnation can be green and it can be spicy, and you get kind of both here. I think the modern Derby is maybe one of the greatest carnation fragrances ever made. That's how I would describe the modern Derby. I wouldn't describe it as the greatest leather. I would describe it as the greatest carnation, or one of my favorite carnation fragrances ever made, I would say. The carnation note is masterclass, brilliant, stunning carnation note. And now Wasser, interestingly enough, he has experience in substituting florals and trying to make them kind of fit into the mold of a vintage fragrance. And if you go back to something like, if you know your Guerlain history, go back and check out something like Coriolan, okay? This is discontinued, one of the best bottles of all time. This is Jean-Paul Guerlain's last big, you know, mainstream masculine release for Guerlain that they allowed him to create. And this flopped. And rumor is that this actually started its life in the same Centurion project as Derby. That these two were started in the same time in the early 80s. He just finished and released Derby in 85. This didn't get released until the late 90s. Now, tastes had moved on by then, but Coriolan is also a take on a Chypre, but it is much more, I would say, how would I describe it? I would describe it as a much fresher take on a Chypre. There's a lot of fresher notes in here, like Neroli and Petit Grand, and there's still leather, and there's still oak moss, and there's still, you know, benzoin. And, well, I don't think there's any benzoin in Derby, but there's still vetiver and patchouli, and you can kind of see the strange similarity. These are both, in the grand scheme of things, these are kind of strange Guerlain releases, but he was kind of working on them at a similar time. This just got released decades later, is all. And it got discontinued, and long story short is I love this in the summer heat. I adore Coriolan in the summer heat. It's spicy, woody. You know, if you're gonna make me wear this type of masculine Chypre, I would take Coriolan all day and twice on Sunday versus something like Chanel's Pour Monsieur Eau de Toilette. Any day of the week, give me Coriolan, any day. And, you know, it gets kind of overlooked, and you can still find bottles of that floating around for dirt cheap compared to Derby, which just goes to show. I mean, it just goes to show Robert Granat also made the bottle here. He made the Eagle bottle for Derby, and he made this one. And Thierry Vosser had to reformulate Coriolan. Now, they changed the name, as Guerlain is apt to do, but he named it L'Âme d'un Eros. And if you go to my channel and click on Guerlain playlist, you'll actually see a comparison video between Coriolan and L'Âme d'un Eros. And there are differences. Again, very similar to the comparison video that I did with Derby. The addition of a couple notes to L'Âme d'un Eros, which is missing from Coriolan, shows up. Like, for example, there's a lemon blossom note in L'Âme d'un Eros that there's not in Coriolan. But the biggest difference is that there's, in the base, instead of having oak moss and leather, which Coriolan had a oak moss leather base, just like Derby did, Thierry Vosser had to improvise. He had to create something else. So what did he add to the base of L'Âme d'un Eros? He added Immortelle. Right? Duh. Immortelle. No, I mean, but he did. He added Immortelle. And Immortelle apparently gives it this dry, almost to recreate that oak moss, if you will. And he did something similar with the carnation in Derby. How he did it, I have no clue. But this lemony carnation, almost, you know, the carnation adds this silky, smooth, spicy green aspect that, while it doesn't perfectly imitate, it does not perfectly imitate the base of Derby, of the original Derby from 1985, God, it comes so close. It comes so close that I honestly don't care whether it's the Eagle bottle, that, you know, go figure. A vintage lover like me doesn't care. I think the version that that Jean-Paul Guerlain and Thierry Vosser made in 2005 is brilliant. I think both of them are amazing, and I don't think it really matters to me, honestly, what version you get. If you can get yourself a bottle of Derby, secure it. Don't mortgage the house to do it. But if you're a lover of vintage fragrances like I am, this is a must sniff. It's not a must own. Nothing is a must own, but it's a must sniff. Get your nose on this. It's such an enjoyable fragrance to wear, and it's so elegant. It's so posh. I even feel underdressed right now wearing this. Like, I feel like I should be in a tux wearing Derby. You know, it's that kind of fragrance. So so that's kind of my take. I mean, I think I pretty much touched on all of the high level things I wanted to. Maybe there were some small things we skipped over, but all in all, I think I'm happy with that. Comparison videos are one of the hardest things to do. You have to constantly be paying attention. You have to know the fragrances. You have to go back and forth, and you know, I think this should give you guys some good firepower. I would love to smell the new Derby, but you know, I'm very happy with what I have. I would love to have an Eagle bottle, but again, I'm very happy with what I have. So, and that's something that I think when you collect fragrances, you're always caught up in kind of getting the next big thing, you know? It's always, once you have something, oh, you're moving on to the next big thing. And I'm really going to try and just sit back and kind of enjoy what I have. And if a good deal kind of drops in my lap, maybe I'll get it here or there, like I did yesterday with Jean Patou's Sublime, the vintage bottle. I do have another vintage that's going to be on the way in the next week or two. So there will still be some unboxings, but I'm really going to try to focus on enjoying what I have, and just be blessed and thankful for what I have. So if you've smelled Derby in any version, I would love to hear your thoughts. Please do leave a comment below. Love seeing your faces. Love interacting with you guys. I learn more from you than you do from me. Of course, the YouTube algorithm is all about likes and subscriptions and comments and all of that stuff. So it does help get the word out, if you will. It's like a beacon, you know, shining to other frag heads. Hey, come join our community here. And lots of new ones have joined. And I hope that the channel can be informative and helpful in making decisions. And, you know, I used to use some of the honest reviews back when there were honest reviews on YouTube. I used to use some of those in some of my buying decisions. And some of the ones that were not honest also influenced me in some buying. But it took me a little bit to discern which ones were honest and which ones aren't. And so, you know, going up against the free bottle brigade is sometimes tough. But this is the kind of content that they're not going to be putting out because, you know, the people who are just fighting to get the video out the fastest when they get their free bottle from the brand, they're not going to take the time to do this type of video, nor will their audience even care. So I think we've carved out a very nice little section so far at Fragcom, but it can still grow. And of course it grows by likes and comments and subscriptions and people watching and all that good stuff. So, but I'm very grateful to everyone who has supported me. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Love doing this with you guys. I'll try to do a live stream today where we maybe sniff some stuff I've never sniffed before. And so yes, if not today, maybe tomorrow. But thanks for watching, everyone. Cheers, guys, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.